Hi, today on the Alexander podcast, we're going to be talking about mental health issues, and I'm going to be very open with you. I'm going to be very relatively explicit, really, about my life in order to convey to you the point of this podcast. You know what I'm actually trying to talk about now. What I've suffered serious mental health issues myself. I don't mean that I've had bipolar or emotional schizoid or acute paranoia or psychosis or any of the very, severe mental health issues. And I think those particular mental health issues are probably beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about today. But the fact of the matter is that in fact, the problem that we have in talking about mental health issues today is that if we believe that mental health issues are, paranoia, psychosis, bipolar, then we are far from the truth of what mental health issues and what mental health is really all about. Now, what I would say to you is that if I wanted to label my own mental health issues, yes, it would be CPOD, Childhood Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And, we are a society that likes to categorise and label. But, of course, even though that is a very relevant label for me, it is just a label. And what I mean there is that, of course, we have a great big, psychology department, in this country. We have a National Health Service that has a mental health aspect. Whether or not we believe that that is producing the right strategies and results for sufferers of the very, wide amount of mental health issues is another matter. And that is what I want to talk about today, is that, for me, when I was very young, obviously when I got to about 18, I had a very difficult childhood. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but, I was brought up in care. I was brought up without parents, and my life in care was made extra difficult because, I wasn't able to I wasn't able to live anywhere specifically. I went from one fostering situation to another, and there were lots of breakdowns, and I stayed much time in children's homes, and it was very, very difficult. I mean, don't get me wrong, though, I had some fantastic times as well, which will be documented elsewhere. And of course, if you live in a children's home, you do have the benefit of having your friends around you all the time. So, it is not to say that I had a very difficult time of it. What you lack is unconditional love. Let's be clear about that. And of course, I can say that quite easily. I lacked unconditional love. But don't we all? If we're living in a nice family where everyone's very happy and loving and all the rest of it, perhaps we don't. But in fact, within the context of family life, we're actually not very great at expressing love or affection, always. And this is what we're really talking about when we talk about mental health issues. We're talking about a sort of gradient, a kind of percentage of satisfaction, if you like, of this unconditional love. So for me, I got to 18 and had never had any, really, There were a few people that made me feel, that perhaps I was worth something, but not really, And up until the age of 10, I was actually relatively abused, and my CPOD, or CPSTD, or whatever they call it, is basically because I was a scapegoat within a fostering situation, and that's a very specific category under that particular heading. And of course, you suffer a lot of different emotional difficulties and low self-esteem and etc. And so the point being is that I then, when I was about 18, I was very paranoid. I did think that people thought I was an idiot. I did think that people, looked down on me. I did feel that I was inferior to everybody around me, and to a certain extent I was, because I hadn't had the love of a mum and dad, which is very strengthening, or even a single parent. I had only had people that were sort of looking after me, if you like, in quite a materialistic sense, but they were never looking after my emotional needs. And so, of course, I got to I was a mess, you know. I was very paranoid, I was very insecure, and very lonely, and found it very difficult actually to make contact, connection with people. You know, I'd make jokes and laugh and muck about, you know, in order to make them like me. If they laughed, then I felt really good. If they didn't laugh, which was most of the time, you know, then it was just a sort of breakdown in a particular relationship that I was trying to have, and people found me annoying, really. And so I went to the doctors and I said to them, you know, I need help, you know. And I had a psychotherapist, you know, a young chap who'd just graduated at the time, and he was just awful, really. Not as a human being, he was a very nice man, actually, you know. But as he sat there listening to my story, which was long and varied, and I was tearful, you know, I could see that he was pale and wan in response to it. And he was holding back his emotional response to that work of me telling this story, you know. And I could see that he was keeping his distance. And, of course, that struck me as very odd. Anyway, you know, I thought, well, you know, it's not my business to judge. I'll come back next week. And I went back the next week. And I suddenly developed this need to just offload once a week. And it was a very strange process, you know. So suddenly, oh, right, now I'm needing to offload. Whether or not it was actually helping me or not was neither here nor there. It was just this process that I was involved in. Anyway, after 6 weeks, my sort of 6 weeks of therapy that I'd been offered, you know, was over. He was off somewhere else. And if I was still mad, inverted commas, you know, I was to then, you know, I don't know, seek further help. But I realised immediately that this psychoanalysis, this psychotherapy, was a pointless exercise, and that one would literally just be circling, you know, week after week, this weird stuff, you know. There was an incident when my therapist was away one week, and instead, well, I mean, not instead, but I actually at that time was also doing, you know, acting, and I was doing audition technique with my rather successful brother, Sean, you know, and he was teaching me about acting and so on like this, and I was doing audition technique with him. Well, I turned up at this church hall that he'd managed to get for us to do this work in. And of course, we didn't do any work because I had this need to offload, which had been generated by this therapy or this so-called therapy, sort of psychotherapy situation. And of course, I just spent 2 hours talking to him, and in the end I said to him, oh, I'm so sorry about all that. I don't really quite know what happened there. And he said, well, you obviously needed to chat. Fine, you know. But I immediately realised that it was what had happened and what was going on. So I, of course, promised myself I'd never go through that process again. And I continued on, and you know, I had some relationships and I had some difficult times. And, you know, constantly the mental health issues were there. The mental health was not good. You know, I was at 20% when probably I should have been at 40 or 50 or 60. And life was very difficult. When I got to about 26, I was practically having some kind of a sort of breakdown, which, you know, sounds a lot more dramatic than it is. You know, you literally are, you know, you're not sort of in hospital having heart palpitations, you know, but you don't feel that your life is what it is. You're tearful. You're unable to proceed with your life. You're not motivated. You don't feel great. That's a very serious mental health issue, because if you're not motivated, how are you going to get up out of bed in the morning to go and do some work? How are you going to believe in anything that you can do? And those are the kind of issues that I'm talking about here today. You know, this kind of way in which we feel that unless you're banging your head against a wall, unless you're having some sort of palpitations, you know, you don't have mental health issues. Well, it's quite untrue. It's quite untrue. Actual proper mental health is really about far more subtle issues than we ever dare to tell ourselves, okay? And so what I would say is that to proceed, you know, I needed some help. Now, I at the time was very, actually I probably still am, but I mean, I was into astrology a little bit, you know, and I was studying that, and I suddenly came across a therapist who was very famous, you know, and very successful, you know, you know, I went to see her in this huge house, and she was what you really call a sort of astrological counsellor. And so she was trained in, you know, I don't know, one counselling or another, and used astrology alongside that as well. And for all intents and purposes, she seemed quite good. You know, she recorded me, and I told her my story again and what had happened to me and so on. Da, da, da. She then proceeded to become my therapist, you know. I'm quite enjoying it, you know, this novelty of the astrology. You know, I turned up, she had this huge house. I thought, my God, she's very successful. You know, wonderful, you know. But one time, I was at home and I was very, very emotional and very, very depressed and sad. And I was crying and I got emotional and I thought I'd phone her up and see if she can give me some support. I phoned her up and she said, "Oh, Nick, oh yes, I'm writing a book at the moment. I don't think I can deal with this. Could you phone my friend? I'll give you her number. Oh, right, okay. So, of course, one of the things that you feel when you grow up in the way that I did was a lot of rejection. So, of course, this rejection by the therapist was quite painful. And then I phoned up her friend, who was desperate, and I said to her, "I don't know what's going on. Why did she do that? What's wrong with her? Why is she suddenly saying this to me? She took me on and now she's saying she can't do that." And the therapist's friend said, "Oh, I don't know. Oh, right, okay, fair enough. I don't know. Well, let me call her and speak to her." And anyway, but it was over, right? I mean, there was no compassion, really. There was just this, "Oh my God, this guy's going to be a bit too much. We can't deal with it." They want you to turn up there and be, "Hello, yes, I'm fine. Well, yes, I feel like this today." And so this is a really, false situation. Now, of course, if somebody's crying and, they're emotional, it is difficult for us as individuals, to cope with that. But we must be able to. If we have good mental health, if we are well balanced, we will be able to cope with it. If we have our own issues that we've not dealt with, we won't be able to cope with it. Now there lies the rub. You see, these therapists that have trained and read all these books and written all these articles and passed these exams absolutely haven't been through anything themselves that has actually brought around a state of mind that is rounded. That is what we could call, 90 or 95% mental health, clarity and strength. Okay? And that is because the approach is entirely wrong. Freud was great, but it was a load of old tosh in the end. And what we have is this sort of horrible kind of analytical process. All of the psychotherapists I've ever met, I mean, not all of them, let's face it, some of them are quite nice, but it's not a good approach. It's not a good approach. It doesn't help people. So, of course, I gave all that up and I suddenly obviously wasn't in that therapy situation. And, of course, at the same time, I had been doing Alexander Technique. And I had been reading Jung, and I had been studying the process of, personal development and so on in various schools. But Alexander Technique was body work. Alexander Technique is body work, And I found that the more I did it, the better I felt. The more I did it, the more I felt like I wanted to take responsibility for myself. And this taking responsibility for myself was really the key. But it was not a mental issue. It wasn't an intellectual idea. It wasn't about talky therapies. It was literally about a process. A little bit more akin to yoga or meditation. It was on that side of the world, and it was just a subtle process that allowed me to come back to myself, calm down about the things that had happened to me, differentiate myself in the present from the past in a very unique and beautiful way, really. And I suddenly realised that actually I didn't need any of those therapies. I didn't need any of this psychobabble. This Alexander Technique was helping me more with my emotional well-being, more with my mental health, more with being a balanced human being than I could ever have imagined or succeeded at with those other therapies. So I think when we look at what mental health is, it really is a little bit like physical health. If you run and you train and you do it in an intelligent way and you eat good food and you sleep well, you're going to get fit and you're going to have a great chance at winning that race. The race to mental health is like that. Only our methods must be from the body, from the musculature, which is intrinsically linked with the mind. So we're talking about it must be a mind-body effort. That mind-body effort can be yoga, can be meditation, can be Alexander Technique, can be many things. But for me, having looked into lots and lots of different schools of thought, I find that the most effective, the most subtle, the most genteel, if you like, is the Alexander Technique. And so I have found my salvation through this technique. And I hope that you will too. And I'm putting out this audio in order that I can share a little bit of my story, a little bit of what I've found with mental health. But I think we need to sort of think about mental health in a very different way. You know, it's not scary. It is just the reality. We all have mental health. But don't ever think that unless you're, schizophrenic or bipolar, don't ever think that that means you don't have mental health issues. Every single human being on this planet has mental health problems. And we need to have a solution to those problems. We need to continually improve ourselves mentally. We need to continually work at finding harmony within ourselves, resolving the issues of our past, so that we may go forward with a much more open, a much more, loving way of life. And I can tell you now, that even though I had such a traumatic childhood, having done the Alexander Technique and got my life in balance, I now have a beautiful wife and a beautiful family, which I would never have got had I not worked on my own mental health. Thank you so much for listening today. And of course, I will continue this conversation in the future. So do look out for other audios. Check my website, www.alexandertechnique.tv, for further information about the work that I do. And hope to see you one day. Thank you. Bye-bye.